let's talk about Silverstein, who dropped their brand new album, Misery Made Me.
Oh Lord, I wish that I could quit, but the idol in the middle tends to rule with the fist of my...
Also known as the album with Misery number 1.
This is Misery number 1. Yeah.
This is Misery number 1.
Tune in next month for Misery number 2.
Yeah. So I had the advantage of seeing Silverstein open for Beartooth a week before this album came out. They didn't perform all of the singles. They performed It's Over, Ultraviolet, and Bankrupt, I believe. And they didn't tease any songs live at the end of the tour. But they put on a really good performance, and it got me more excited for this album, which I was already a lot more excited for compared to A Beautiful Place to Drown. The last single that they dropped for this album, In Die Alone, was not doing it for me. It still isn't, but that's the only song I don't really like on this album. I think the rest of this album holds up really well. Even the feature of Mike Kranika of The Devil Wears Prada on Slow Motion, with The Devil Wears Prada being a band that I'm not particularly a fan of. I think the feature works out great. The Nothing Nowhere feature works out great on Live Like This at the end. Trevor Daniel is there on Cold Blood, I guess. But yeah, this is a really strong album. I'd say this met my expectations going in. I never expected Silverstein to be making a grand run for like one of my favorite albums of the year, but I expected something that I would listen to front to back and be like, that was a good album. I got a couple of songs I'm taking away from here that I'm going to have in rotation for a while. It's going to get stuck in my head. It's not going to be making end of year type stuff, but I'm going to be really glad that I gave this a listen, and a month removed from it, I am. There's a lot to like about this album, I think.
I will say that I think that Silverstein have perfected a formula for me personally. And it's that they're going to put out an album consistently that I think is incredibly okay.
Yeah.
And then somewhere along the line, they're going to say, all right, I want to drop 2 bangers on this track list.
True.
And then I'm going to take those bangers and I'm going to sit on them for years and love them to death and forget about the rest of the album.
So what are the 2 bangers here then?
100% true.
They are back-to-back on this album, and it is The Altar/Mary and Slow Motion.
Interesting.
I also like Bankrupt is okay.
I was going to say Slow Motion Bankrupt for me.
Yeah, I had Bankrupt saved for a long time actually, and for whatever reason recently it just unclicked with me, I guess would be a way to put it. I don't know why.
Dude, Bankrupt is so good live. If you ever get the chance,
it seems like a song.
If you ever get the chance to see Silverstein like open, like seeing Silverstein, like probably wouldn't go see Silverstein headline, but having them open for Beartooth, like absolutely, I'm gonna go and see that. Right. Bankrupt live is so good. It is so good. That's all.
I just wanted to say that I think, for me, what it is a lot with the vocal delivery oftentimes sounds very samey, I guess, for me. And so I have to kind of pick and choose my favorites. And the ones that end up being my favorites are the ones with a really good feature or that sound different from all the others. There is not a single song on here that sounds like The Altar. I mean, it's its own special entity, and I was very excited to hear it. And in Slow Motion, you have
up The Altar because it's not on the same level of holy shit moment as Cabin Fever, but that song threw me for a loop the first time I heard it. I was halfway through that song thinking this is like potentially a top 10 song of the year.
Yeah,
I think if The Altar/Mary, instead of like going from like insane, Silverstein chose violence for the first 2 minutes, and then Silverstein chose sleep for the last 2 minutes. If you have a structure that goes from violence to like a calm break and then you build back up to violence, we're talking a top 10 song of the year with The Altar, I think.
You know, now you say that, I'm going to recommend you Gods by Sleep Token.
It's on my to eventually listen to list.
We'll get there one day.
We'll get there one day. We're close to a year removed from what's that album called?
This place will be your tomb.
Whatever. Yeah, we're getting close to the 1 year of that album, so I think it's about time I probably try and fit Sweep Token into my schedule of albums to catch up to. But anyway, The Altar is a fantastic song, and I'm glad that's one of the two that really stuck with you.
Yeah, I guess I'm just something about Silverstein's delivery. I applaud them for being this far into their career and being still so solid. I feel like a lot of times, because they're over 2 decades into their career at this point, and a lot of bands get
20-year
tour. 20-year tour. I was gonna say that I feel like a lot of bands get to this point and their ability to create something new and dynamic kind of fades out, I guess. But with Silverstein, with something like The Altar, it feels like there's always 1 or 2 songs on an album, on their newer albums, that still push those boundaries, and they're still doing what they do best. If you liked Silverstein before and were a Silverstein fan, this is just another one in the books that you can add like 1 million songs to your playlist from. Unfortunately, I'm not a huge Silverstein fan, so it's not doing it for me, but I got my 2 songs, and that's all I wanted out of this, so I'm happy with it. Justin, I know you have liked a lot of Silverstein in the past. What are your favorites?
Did you have it in top 10 in 2020?
I believe it did. I believe it was like number 10.
Yeah, cracked my top 10 back in 2020. It is not gonna hit it this year, unfortunately. A lot of what I liked about A Beautiful Place to Drown, I really did not get with this album, unfortunately.
Yeah.
A lot of what I liked from that was more kind of electronic, more experimental stuff.
Mm-hmm.
From that album, I had saved Where Are You, Shapeshift, Madness, and Say Yes. And I really didn't get anything that really sounded similar. It was kind of more the harsher kind of punky side that I'm not too big a fan of. But what are you gonna do?
Right. Well, you can't expect it to to always get that, but you've got that album. I've got my 2 songs. That's the thing about getting an album that you enjoy from an artist and getting a bad one. It's like, well, even if they don't release a good one, you've always got the other one to go back to, right? Like,
well, the problem is that I'm probably gonna be 2 for 2 for punky bands that I really liked in 2020 for some fucking reason.
Mm-hmm.
Point North. Sad Point North.
Yeah. You know what? Sad Point North is for me too. It's okay.
I think the last thing I kind of want to touch on is the transition at the end of the album from Live Like This into Misery. The 2 tracks transitioned like perfect transition from one into the other, super smooth. And I'm not typically a fan of like super slow kind of piano ballad-esque songs to close an album, but Misery actually worked for me. Something about, I don't know, I think there's something about like the story that the album was telling. Not that I have any idea on what the story is, but I had a sense of when I got to Misery, I was like finishing something. And it felt like a very satisfying conclusion to an album to me. I also really just enjoyed Live Like This as a song in general. So back-to-back albums with Nothing Nowhere features, actually.
The Nothing Nowhere feature. I think it was really good. I wish the song it was on was better, but I digress.
I think the only other thing I want to mention, I know I talked about it with Ultraviolet back in, I want to say it was February when that song came out, but the lyricism on Ultraviolet is still really solid. I still really enjoy the chorus of can't see with my own eyes, can't feel the lows or the highs, doesn't stop when I try to fight it, I get lost in the ultraviolet. And then the second half with can I rewire my head when all the connections are dead. Just there's a lot of like cool lyrical ties in Ultraviolet that I really appreciated, and that's why Ultraviolet's still my favorite song on this album. It was very hard to pick a favorite off of this album. With A Beautiful Place to Drown, I had very clearly Infinite as my favorite. Whereas with this album, there isn't a clear standout for me. The Alter Mary is like, it blew me away on first listen, but it's not something I can have on repeat necessarily, just in the way that it's structured. And then all the other songs that are in that conversation, I mean, it's mostly just Bankrupt and Ultraviolet. There isn't anything that's really selling me more about one than the other. Like, you could kind of flip a coin and say, hey, Bankrupt's my favorite song on the album one day, Ultraviolet's my favorite another day.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that just goes to show, like, the consistency that Silverstein are bringing to the table with this album, which might not be everyone's favorite, but it worked for me, at the very least, more than it did on A Beautiful Place to Drown.